Hi everyone, this is False
Hello.
Positive. Hi Yariv, hi
Hi.
Desmet. Very special guest today, Desmet Mattias. Desmet, we're very excited about the crowd formation. It was a very good interview, so we wanted to discuss about this topic and among other topics that we have researched in our program. Yariv?
So I've also listened to it. We have done in the show for False Positive many episodes in Hebrew about the ability about how the social engineering works, how you engineer the way that people are thinking, the mass hypnosis, the fear, a lot of things that you mentioned in your lecture. And I think that if we understand better and we see how it is applied to Israel, then we can later understand how to break the narrative and bring some of the people, wake some of the people up and prevent what is about to happen to us. So,
Desmet, the first thing that I want you to introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself, about your profession, and then we'll start.
Yes, well, I am a professor in clinical psychology. And I also have a clinical practice as a psychotherapist. But in the beginning of the crisis, I took still another perspective, not that of the clinical psychologist, nor that of the psychotherapist, but the perspective of the statistician, because I also got a master in statistics. And in the beginning of the crisis, I started to study the figures and the graphs on the mortality of the virus, the infection fatality rates, the case fatality rates. And from the beginning, I had the feeling that the dangerousness of the virus was dramatically overestimated when I studied the statistics. And by the end of May 2020, for me, it was actually proven beyond doubt that indeed the initial statistics on the virus were blatantly wrong, actually. And for instance, the initial models of Imperial College, the initial statistical models of Imperial College predicted that by the end of May 2020, in a country such as Sweden, about 80,000 people would die if the country would not go into lockdown. And if the country did go into lockdown, about 50,000 people would die. And the country did not go into lockdown. And by the end of May 2020, 6,000 people died in Sweden. And these 6,000 people, 6,000 victims of the coronavirus, were even counted in a very enthusiastic way, as I usually say it, because all people with severe comorbidities such as cancer or severe diabetes or other severe conditions besides an infection with the coronavirus and who died were considered a corona victim, which usually is not the case. For instance, if the number of people dying from influenza are counted, then people who suffered from severe other conditions are never included in the count of the influenza deaths. But now they did, and even then, even in a country such as Sweden, even then only 6,000 people the death of 6,000 people could be attributed to the coronavirus, while the initial models predicted that about 80,000 people would die, which means that the initial models overestimated the dangerousness of the virus or the mortality of the virus with at least a factor 13, which is huge, of course.
You know, the Israeli Prime Minister said that the first, when the pandemic started, he said that this is the end of the humanity, the end of the world for the human species, the coronavirus. He just said that on the news.
And we also had models in Israel from the Weizmann Institute and from other institutes where they overestimated big time the models. Did not materialize until today. They still use it, and nobody. But the excuse for the public was we were in a lockdown. If we were not in a lockdown, then look what would have happened. Then you tell them, but look what happened in Sweden, as you mentioned, and they tell you, many people died in Sweden. That's usually what they say.
Yes, of course. Yes.
They show you the graphs and.
Yes. Yes. Well, and for me, the strangest thing was that once it became clear that the initial models were dramatically overestimating the mortality of the virus, that at that moment, you would expect that the entire because this entire corona strategy claims in a very explicit way to be a scientific approach. So you would expect that if the initial models prove wrong, that in that case, the approach will be corrected and that policymakers will conclude that the initial measures were far too severe in proportion to the dangerousness of the virus. But that did not happen at all. To the contrary, the corona measures and the corona narrative just continued as if the models were right and as if the models were correct. And a second thing that I noticed in the beginning of the corona crisis was that in a very specific way, the field of attention was extremely narrow. I mean, meaning that it was as if suddenly only corona victims existed. And for instance, we've never seen a comparison between the possible danger, the possible number of casualties the coronavirus could claim, and the possible number of victims the corona measures could claim. Because from the beginning, from the first weeks of the crisis, institutions such as the United Nations warned us that as a consequence of the lockdowns, more people could starve, could die of hunger in developing countries than the number of people that could possibly die from the coronavirus if no measures were taken at all. And that was something that actually was very clear from the beginning. The collateral damage of the measures would be far worse than the damage that the coronavirus could possibly cause. And in one way or another, nobody seems to really notice that, or only a very small number of people seem to notice it. Most people seemed so focused on, hypnotized by this corona narrative, that the only thing that had an impact were the victims claimed by the virus, and not the victims of the corona measure. So
I don't think that happened.
Yes.
I don't think that they have such a narrow insight on this topic, only on the virus. The focus is only on the virus, not on anything else.
Yeah, indeed. And then that was a moment, as soon as I noticed that the statistics were utterly absurd, and the field of attention was so narrowly focused on the corona victims that all the collateral damage was ignored or neglected. That was the moment I started to take the perspective of a clinical psychologist, and I started to wonder, like, what is happening in our society that people do not seem to be aware what the consequences will be of this entire of all these corona measures. And it took me a few months until August, I think, August 2020, before I had the feeling that I could really hit the nail, and that I understood that what was happening was a large-scale process of mass formation. Maybe it would be good if I explained a little bit about this process. So, mass formation is a specific kind of group formation, which manifests or emerges in a society when very specific conditions are met. And the first and most crucial condition is that there should be a lot of people who experience a lack of social bond, a lack of connectedness. That's what Hannah Arendt, the German Jewish philosopher, I guess she's famous in Israel as well. That's what Hannah Arendt called the atomized subject. So there should be a lot of atomized subjects. The first condition for mass formation is that there is a high percentage of so-called atomized subjects, people who experience a lack of social bond, a lack of social connectedness. And then and before the corona crisis, this was really the case, because there was research that showed that about 50%, I think, of the people mentioned that their only meaningful exchanges happen through the internet, for instance, which is quite strange. So a second condition is that there should be a lack of meaning making, a lack of sense making. A lot of people who experience a lack of meaning making and sense making in life. And also, if you look at the number of people who mentioned that they considered their job a so-called bullshit job, I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Graeber, a British professor, wrote a book about this phenomenon. It means that a bullshit job is a job of which the people who does it has the feeling that it's completely senseless and that it's up to no good, not for themselves and not for other people. That's a bullshit job. Then the third condition is that there should be a lot of free-floating anxiety. That means that is anxiety that is not connected to a mental representation. So if you're scared of thunder or of a lion or of a dog, you know what you're scared of, and your anxiety is connected to a mental representation. But sometimes people are anxious without knowing what they are anxious for. And that's the most painful kind of anxiety. It threatens to become panic. And in such a condition, people usually try to find something that could explain their anxiety, or that to which they could attach their anxiety. Okay, and then fourth condition is that there should be a lot of free-floating frustration and aggression in society. Also, frustration and aggression, people cannot really attribute to a specific cause. So, and all these four conditions are connected to each other. First, you have the lack of social bond, and if people as human beings, as social beings, experience a lack of social bond, they usually will also experience a lack of meaning making. Their lives will feel as if they are meaningless because they are not in satisfying social bonds. And they will also experience a lot of anxiety. They cannot really connect to something, and they will feel frustrated and aggressive also without really be able to attribute it to something. So if these four conditions are met in a society, then something very specific might happen. And that is that if under such conditions, a narrative is distributed or disseminated through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety and the strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, then all this free-floating anxiety might connect to the object of anxiety, and there might be a huge willingness in the population to participate in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety. In other words, if there is the object of anxiety could be a virus, and the strategy to deal with this object could be a lockdown, social distancing, mask wearing, and so on. And that's what you see if there is a lot of free-floating anxiety in a population, and such a story is repeatedly distributed in the mass media. All this free-floating anxiety might connect to this representation of this new object of anxiety, and people might be willing to participate in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety. And at that moment, something else happens as well. Because many people, most people, participate in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, there is a new, once all this free-floating anxiety is connected to the object of anxiety that is indicated by the narrative, and all people start to anxiety, then a new kind of social bond emerges. People feel connected again because they all fight the same heroic struggle with the object of anxiety. And a new kind of solidarity and a new kind of meaning making emerges in this way. And that is the reason, this new kind of solidarity, because human beings are intrinsically and essentially social beings, this new kind of solidarity makes them switch from a very aversive, extreme situation in which they are socially disconnected, socially isolated, to exactly the opposite, to the strong connection that exists in a crowd or a mass. And that leads to a certain mental intoxication and a new kind of solidarity, which is the real reason why people continue to go along with the narrative, why people believe in the narrative, why people buy into the narrative, even if the narrative is blatantly wrong or utterly absurd. So that's the reason, because it leads up to this new social bond, to this new solidarity. That's also
Do you
why...
see that fear has something to do with this connection? The fact that they're using fear?
You mean the people who disseminate the mainstream narrative? I don't know, because in the first place, I think what is happening is that the fear that was already, the anxiety that was already there in society, that existed already, because there was a huge quantum of fear, anxiety, depression, and psychological discontent. For instance, in a country such as Belgium, every year, 300 million doses of antidepressants were used. 300 million doses each year in a country with a population of about 11 million people. It's huge. And of course, the narrative itself, I think usually most people would maybe not be so scared of the narrative on the coronavirus, because people would probably see that that when they look around them, that not that many people die, that not that many people get sick. But all this is radically different in a population which is already saturated with a lot of free-floating anxiety, because in that case, people want to believe a story that indicates an object of anxiety, because in this way, they can mentally control their anxiety, because anxiety that is not connected to a mental representation is highly uncontrollable. And under such conditions, people want to believe a narrative on an object of anxiety, because in that way they can connect it to their anxiety to something.
We call it a virtual enemy. You create a virtual enemy, and then you connect all of the rest.
Indeed. And so that the real reason, that's something crucial, that is crucial to understand. The real reason why people believe in the narrative is because also, if you do not go along with the narrative, if you refuse to identify with the narrative, if you refuse to get vaccinated or something, then the first thing that people will reproach you is that you are not showing citizenship. That
you're not in the team.
That you lack solidarity. And in that way, I think that unknowingly, people show that the real reason why they want everybody to participate is because of this new social bond. And the most strange thing is that we often think that when the measures will get even more absurd, that more and more people will wake up and start to see what is happening. But that's not sure at all, because actually all these measures are have the function of a kind of a ritual by which people show that they belong to a collective, to a new collective, to a new social bond. And a certain behavior is more suitable to function as a ritual as it is more absurd and as it demands more sacrifices of an individual. That's exactly the definition of ritualistic behavior, of a ritual. A ritual is a kind of behavior that has no pragmatic function at all, that has no practical relevance, and that through which an individual sacrifices something. And that's exactly what the corona measures now mean, or that's exactly what the corona measures are. They are, in most cases, they are actually almost without practical relevance. They do not have a real effect on the distribution of the virus and so on. That's actually quite clear, I think, if you compare countries which took very severe measures and then countries which imposed only very mild measures. Usually there is only a very small difference between the countries in the course of the pandemic. So most of the measures actually do not have a practical relevance, and they also they ask huge sacrifices of the individual. But for a substantial part of the population, probably about 30%, this won't make any difference at all, because for them all these measures are a kind of a ritual which they participate in just because it leads to this new social bond. Yeah.
30%.
Yes, there are usually, in a process of mass formation, there are usually three groups. And the first group is a group who is really hypnotized, because mass formation is really similar to hypnosis. It's actually the same. Someone like Sigmund Freud, but also Gustave Le Bon, Canetti, they all concluded that mass formation is not similar to hypnosis. It's exactly the same. It is a kind of hypnosis. And
in this kind of hypnosis, the control is not in your hand, is in the other guy's hand, the one that hypnotized you. So he has total control on you.
Yes, to a large extent. Well, for some people, yes. I think this is true for about 30% of the people. Like in a process of mass formation, usually only about 30% of the people is really hypnotized. So only 30% of the people is really into the process of mass formation, is really going along with the narrative, really believes in the narrative, and so on. But then an additional 40% of the people is not hypnotized, or not really hypnotized, but will never go against the crowd. So meaning that they will not speak out, and they will just go along with the crowd just because they think it's easier and because they are scared.
Silent majority.
The silent majority. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the silent majority. Yeah, just because they are in one way or another, they do not dare to defy the crowd. And then there is an additional 20%, 25%, it's hard to say, sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, who is not hypnotized and who wants to speak out, who says there is something wrong here, something is going on that is really strange here, and I want to make it clear.
So if we have 30, 40, and then another 30, why the 40% goes with the 30% of the hypnosis people, and not with the other 30% are fully aware of what's happening, doesn't afraid to speak it out, and get quite loudly about it? So why the 40% doesn't go with those 30%?
Yes, because the first 30%, the crowd, speaks with one voice. So they are one solid social group. They all believe the same, they all tell the same, and in that way it's their voice that sounds the loudest in a society, and that's why the 40% goes along with them. And
so we need the competitive narrative that will be strong and really narrow and really focused to compete with the established narrative.
Yes, we need something. We need a certain principle, that can unify us. That's true. We need a principle that can unify us, but that's not so easy, because we should watch out that we do not become a crowd ourselves. And
there is a very unique situation in Israel right now, in which, because of the booster shot, now it requires people who took the 2 vaccines. Now they need to take the 3rd shot because the 2 vaccines were not effective enough. And it lost its effectiveness. And now we are in a unique situation in Israel where many people in this 40% have the possibility to wake up and move to the other side because they realize, oh, this is wrong. Why do I need to take another shot? There are side effects.
We see it happens. We see it happens in the numbers.
We see that only half of the population above 12 took the booster. Only half. Because many people, suddenly people are speaking about the side effects, and suddenly people are so we see. So this is like a unique point in time where the majority may move to the other side. So what do you think like should be the strategy in order to convert as many people to the other side?
Yes. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with...
This is only in Israel, so it's a unique situation.
Yes. You know, one of the first scholars who wrote a very important book on the process of mass formation was Gustave Le Bon. He was a French sociologist and psychologist. And he mentioned already that it's extremely hard to wake up the masses. He said it's extremely difficult. But if the people who are not under hypnosis continue to speak out and continue to show the absurdity of the story or the strange elements in the story, then the hypnosis might become less deep. And this might prevent the crowd from committing atrocities, because crowds are always inclined to commit atrocities. So one very important thing, no matter if we can wake up the crowd or not, we have to continue to speak out. That's extremely important. You have to, no matter how hard it is sometimes, because I started to speak from the beginning of the Corona crisis, and before that I never spoke out in public space because I had my academic job and that was enough for me. And I know that how hard it is sometimes to be criticized all the time, and
it is.
But yes, but still, I think it's extremely important that we continue to speak out, because hypnosis is a psychological phenomenon that is caused by the resonance of a voice. And if there is only one voice in public space, the voice of the mainstream narrative, then the hypnosis will become deeper and deeper. And if there are other voices, the hypnosis will become less deep. And in that case, more and more people will be able to see, for instance, the side effects of the vaccinations.
And you can measure it, because you will see the government pressure is getting higher and more force to make the people do basic stuff that they was doing in the first round, the second round, the third round, waves. I don't know how they call it in your country. So they need to pressure more. So that tells us that something is breaking in the hypnosis.
Yeah, probably indeed. Yes, they might be aware that without pressure, people will start to disobey, that they won't go along with the measures anymore. That's possible. Yes, that's possible. So, but I think in any case, it is extremely important that people, that there are dissonant voices who continue to speak in public space, because in that case, people will be much more alert and they will be able to see, for instance, the side effects of the vaccination campaigns, or the collateral damage of the measures, because that's a strange thing. If people are really in deep hypnosis, they will not notice it. I know people who immediately after the vaccine, and who even didn't realize that it was because of the vaccine, while it concerned side effects that were really typical, like thrombosis, for instance, which happened a few days after the vaccine, and people were talking about it as if they were not aware that it might have to do something with the vaccine. So
in Israel, it's even worse. People got the shot, then they got sick with COVID. After the shot, they would post, "We are lucky that we took the vaccine, because if we didn't take the vaccine, we would get it worse."
Yeah. Yes, it's almost, yes.
Well, the vaccine is not effective if you got the COVID.
Yeah. Yes.
Why do you think it
and you
happened?
probably would have gotten it mild anyhow, because the numbers are very small for people who get it severe. This in certain ages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you optimistic about those specific people? You think that they will wake up?
Some won't, but not everybody has to wake up. As soon as a major part of the population is awake and prepared to speak out, then the crisis is over, and the mass hypnosis will stop. And actually, the real challenge is for the people who are not under hypnosis to unify in one way or another, in an ethical way, in a way they have to unify without becoming a crowd themselves, because in a crowd, people lose all their capacity for critical thinking. They all start to function in the same way on a mental level. So I think the challenge is we should find a way to unify and to manifest as one social group, and then you will see that the middle 40% will switch direction, and the crowd will wake up.
You know, I see two things that are very interesting. See people from our side. Okay, my side is the side that doesn't going to take the vaccine. Okay, I put it here. So from my side, I see people that just very afraid from something else, like dictatorship.
Yes.
Okay. They think that this is worse than getting the virus or getting the sites. So they are thinking the opposite way, because they are afraid more of something else. So it's either way, it's fear.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to understand is, can't we find something that beat fear but doesn't harm us as anxiety, fear does to our society? Is there something more strong than fear that have immediate effect, not something that will take years to build?
You know, one way, indeed, as you said, some people are more scared of ability that a totalitarian system might emerge in our society than that they are scared of the coronavirus. And I was one of them. I've never been really scared of the coronavirus for one reason or another. But I was scared from the beginning that the new technocratic totalitarian society might emerge. And that's something that can work if you, so like the reason why people started to go along with this narrative on the coronavirus and believe in the narrative, one of the reasons, only one, there were others as well, but was that all their anxiety was connected to this representation, mental representation of the coronavirus. And one way to disconnect their anxiety from the coronavirus and to end this state of mass hypnosis is to make them even more scared of something else. That works sometimes. That really works sometimes. Like if you confront people in a very concrete and visual way with the risk of a totalitarian system that might begin, then people might suddenly, all the anxiety might disconnect from the coronavirus, from this representation, and attach to the new
So you switch the picture.
Yes, you disconnect the anxiety from the original representation and you connect it to something else. Sometimes that works, but of course, I don't know. Yes, I don't think actually there is only I don't know if that would be really a profound solution, because the real problem was these 4 conditions that I mentioned in the beginning. Like all this, there's a lack of social connection, there's lack of meaning making, there's all this free-floating anxiety, all this free-floating frustration and aggression. As long as this is present in society, then people will find a new object of anxiety. We've seen all these different objects of anxieties every time with a certain amount of mass formation emerging. For instance, the whole terrorism narrative, then the climate narrative, now the virus narrative. Of course, I don't say that there are no climate problems or that there were no problems with terrorists, and I also don't say that there is no virus. But the point is that the societal reaction was very disproportionate, and that you can only understand this if you understand that there was this huge quantum of anxiety and frustration and lack of social connectedness and lack of meaning making in society, which made people react. So in the end, we should try to find out why we ended up in this terrible psychological mental state in our society, and we should find a solution for that. I think that's the only really profound solution to the problem we are facing now. Yeah, and I believe that in this case, I believe that we need, so the group who is awake should continue to speak out, and that can sound a little
but
bit,
in
silly.
one voice, strict narrative.
I don't know if it has to be with one voice, yes, and at least they should all tell loud and clear that there is something wrong with this approach, and that we should reconsider the entire approach, and so on. I don't know if we really have to speak with one voice. I think that the characteristic that unifies us can also be that we all speak in an as sincere way as possible. That's something that can unify this group without the necessity for this group to all think the same. That's not a necessity, I think. The most important thing is, I think, that there are enough people who speak out loud and tell that they do not agree with the mainstream narrative. And then I think that in the years to come, there will be a strong process of segregation in our society. So I do believe that that we will not be able to avoid the fact that the people who do not want to go along with the corona measures and who don't want this vaccines and this corona passport and stuff, that they are marginalized. They will be pushed out of regular society. I'm afraid that it will. I am afraid that it will be.
So that was my next topic. I think it also relates to what the Kobe was. But so in the last 3 months, from July, when our prime minister, the new one, stood on stage and actually started it directly, there is a movement to hate the people who didn't take the vaccine.
Yes.
and to eliminate them out of society.
Yes.
Right.
We are lucky. We are lucky that they did it at the same time when they started with the booster.
Mm-hmm.
So many people got a little bit, because now they are part of the people who are unvaccinated. The people who are not taking the booster.
Yeah.
So I think so. They did it in the same time. I think this was only luck. But
let me connect him to the speech that Prime Minister Bennett in Israel said. Okay, what he said is that the country is divided for two parts. You have 8 people vaccinated, and 8 million people that got the vaccine, and 1 million that didn't get the vaccine.
Which is of course not true. But.
Yeah, and he told the people that the 1 million people getting us all suffer. Okay, so we created
they are endangering us.
Yes, they're endangering us. So he did that. And then he had another speech, did exactly the same. And in the news in Israel, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, you have the Friday show. And what they show you is a category, Israel, 2 Israels, vaccinated and unvaccinated Israels. Okay, they are separating. You have white screen and black screen. Those are the vaccinated, those are the unvaccinated, and the mortality rates and all the statistics about this is the 3rd week in a row that they are showing this on television at the news. Okay, so it's really taking, this way of separation. They also have another thing that's called the battle of the resources. I think you probably know it. So there is an ECMO machine. An ECMO machine is something that you need in case of heart failure or lung failure, so you can consume oxygen. So they're saying that in Israel, they don't have enough. And if a vaccinated people will need the ECMO machine, and you will have to decide if it's a vaccinated people or the unvaccinated people, the doctor will decide that it will be the vaccinated people because they did what they need to do in order to not get into this place, that they're in this place, and it is the act. So I see xenophobia. Okay, and I can see the process that lead us to this point. Okay, we started with fear, then anxiety, then phobia. You became phobic to people that are unvaccinated. You can see irrational behavior of someone that took 3 vaccines, wearing a mask in an open site with children that didn't get vaccinated and is scared to death. So you can see that. And then we can see it a lot, okay? And you can see the phobia, and then I can see the specific phobia that they're aiming to. It's xenophobia. So I can see the whole process. What do you think about that?
Oh, yes, I agree. Yes, of course. Because as I said, like the 4th factor, the 4th condition that leads to mass formation was that all this free-floating frustration and aggression, and all this free-floating frustration and aggression in a process of mass formation is always channeled or is always directed at the enemy of the masses, which meaning the people who do not who are not into the process of mass formation. That's typically what is created now: a new enemy, a new common enemy, who will be marginalized and pushed outside of society. But I think if it is like that we should accept it. And there is one certainty in a process of mass formation, And it is that the crowd or the mass always destroys itself. That's something very strange. It's the same with totalitarian systems as well. So people like and Hannah Arendt all have noticed this and have described it in their books on mass formation and totalitarianism, that something in the system of totalitarianism and something in mass formation is intrinsically self-destructive. So it always destroys itself. And then you can explain that actually in a psychological way, but it would probably lead us too far. But we will see the same now. This system will destroy itself.
But we do not want it to take 30 years until it destroys itself. We
No.
want it to destroy itself in a few months. So what are the conditions that needs to be met in order for it to destroy itself? So how can we accelerate the process?
Yes. Nobody can. And the system destroys itself. That's the point, I think. But I agree with you. I hope it doesn't take 30 years. And I don't think it will take 30 years, because I believe that there has never been a totalitarian system up until now which dealt with its children, let's say, in such a way as what we see now. We see that injecting everybody maybe 2 or 3 times a year with an experimental vaccine might be something that destroys a system much faster than any totalitarian system of the past. Hannah Arendt said something very nice. She said, a totalitarian system is always a monster that devours its own children. And this monster could devour its own children faster and quicker, I think, than the systems of the past. That's always also something very typical for a totalitarian system if you compare it to a classical dictatorship. So a classical dictatorship actually in a psychological at the psychological level is quite primitive. It's just the population that is scared of a relatively small group of people who can impose their social contract to the population in a one-sided way. So they can just impose their social system and their social contract to the population. But a totalitarian system is completely different. The totalitarian system is based on mass formation, and that makes that the entire structure is completely different from a classical dictatorship. For instance, if in a classical dictatorship the opposition is silenced in public space, so if there is no dissonant voice anymore in the public space, then the classical dictator becomes milder. He becomes less aggressive because he knows that he has to be friendly to the population to convince them that his dictatorship is actually the best solution to everyone. And so something like that. So it's almost always a dictator becomes less aggressive once he's really in control of the situation, and when the opposition is silenced in public space. And in a totalitarian system, it's exactly the opposite. If in a totalitarian system the opposition is silenced and there is no dissonant voice anymore in public space, then first the totalitarian system starts to manifest all its cruelty and all its aggression. And yes.
So we're in a bad situation, not in the good scenario.
No, it should make us realize that we have to continue to speak. And we should not only do it for ourselves, but always also for the people who are under the hypnosis. Because it is exactly at the moment when the dissonant voices are silenced or stop to speak, that the totalitarian system becomes a monster that devours its own children. It's exactly at this moment. This happened around 1930 in the Soviet Union and around 1935 in Nazi Germany. And at every moment it was the same. It was when the opposition shut up, when the opposition did no longer speak out, that the cruelty of the totalitarian system really started. And that's because it's based on this process of mass formation. Totalitarianism and mass formation are a kind of madness. That's the that's completely different to a dictatorship. And
that's what I have two questions.
Yes.
Very interesting. As a Jew, I say to myself, our fathers, actually grandfathers, it's not that far away, okay? They're still living, okay? They came to Israel, built Israel as a place that will be secure for our people. They come from the Holocaust, so they've already been suffering for this. So today, when they use, the green passport, they know it's the yellow badge. They know it, and they still do it.
That's the issue. When you tell them
one second.
When you tell them that, they don't realize it's under the impression.
Yes, when they do it, they don't. This question, and I came up with an answer that I want you to give your perspective on. We are the only people in the world that the manipulation of the system wasn't on them. We were the victim. We weren't the people, the German people, the French people. Okay, we weren't the people that they established manipulate, so they will see us as a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We were the problem. So this is why, even though that we suffered horribly from those practices, this is the first time that it happened on us.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't really understand the manipulation, because if we see it in French, you can see millions of people out there protesting because they know this is the second time in 70 years that they're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you go to Italy, even Italy, you will see millions of people. I don't know if millions, but people.
Mm-hmm.
You will see it in England. Okay, you will see it in Europe, but you don't see it in Israel at all.
Yes, but you don't see it in Belgium either. But okay, yes, that might be one attempt to explain.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I don't know if it's correct. It's possible. Yeah. I think that people now have the feeling that it's not the same compared to World War II, for instance.
Exactly.
Because people can now choose. They have the feeling, yeah, but everybody can choose to take the vaccine or not. It's a rational choice, and if you make the decision not to take it, then that's something completely different compared to being a Jew in Nazi Germany, because Jews in Nazi Germany could not choose. And I think that's what
the
people...
illusion of the freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
This is what separates you see.
Yes, indeed, that illusion. Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
While actually the basic dynamics are exactly the same. Of course, the basic dynamics is that there is an ideology that is imposed to society and that transgresses all ethical boundaries and principles. That's the that's in that respect it's exactly the same. That's what totalitarianism is. There is like an absurd, simple logic which is extremely compelling,
mm-hmm.
and which drives people across all ethical boundaries. That was what happened in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and that is what's happening now. It's exactly the same. Yeah.
Do you want something to ask?
Because every person in Israel, when they're educated in school, the entire legacy is built around the Holocaust. And we see movies, how it happens in society, and we are very well aware of how it happens in Germany. But now it seems that everybody is like, it's connected, it's not the same.
The first thing in Israel, the government tells you, if you try to compare to the Holocaust, they say, you can't compare. Compare it, They even put some laws around this. Okay, you can't compare it to the Holocaust. In Israel, you can't do it.
In Yad
This is the
Vashem,
first thing that they do.
in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial, in
Yeah, I
Israel,
know.
they put the green badge.
You can't,
That's how you
even if
understand.
you were a survivor, you can't go to Yad Vashem.
Yeah.
Do you understand how traumatic it is?
Yes. Yes. Incredible. Yes. I know it's almost it's almost so strange that people do not see the similarities. It's giving people a sign, and if you don't wear the sign, then you're a second class citizen. So it's yeah. All the rest is yeah, or excuses.
And they invented this in Israel, and then export it to the world. Like they say, they say, if we try and make it in Israel, we can make it everywhere. So they tried it in Israel, and they know that they will succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but let's hope that we should learn from the past, and we should know that this time we should not shut up. We should continue to speak. Believe me, that's the most important thing. We should continue to speak out.
Okay.
Because when people stop to speak, then the physical destruction starts. Then they are completely dehumanized. Because the essence of a human being is that it speaks, that it uses language, that it expresses itself in language. And we should continue to do so. We should never stop speaking.
Because you build the narrative with the terminology.
Yes.
So you need to use it. This is one of the most effective tools that we have.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah,
right.
Of course.
I wanted to talk about the Kubler-Ross model. Okay, Kubler-Ross model talks about grief, how we deal with grief, and it makes 5 steps of the griefs. So the first step is denial, and then comes the anger. The third one is bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Those are the 5 steps. Okay, but this model is around people that lose something that's very pressure to them. They lose a relative or something like this. I try to look at the mass population with this model and see the stages that we're in and the stages that we're in front of us, okay? So we can predict the future, and the you can exactly estimate which step you are in right now, okay? So I think that we started with denial. The whole population lose something, whereas human beings lose friends to the virus, or maybe to the side effects of the vaccine, and we lose our freedom, our rights. As a collective, we lost a lot in the last 2 years. So I think that we're somewhere between denial to the next step, that is anger. Because we started to see protesters around the world. We see much more aggression. We see people coming out, speaking loud. I can see the anger building, okay? In this stage, I understand, as someone that in Israel are building the rejection to the government, that anger is something that I need to nourish, to cherish in those people, because that's what gives them the motivation to go out and do something. Without this stage, without the anger, we go directly to depression and exception.
Mm.
So if we see that we are in this stage, do you think that we need to pressure more to the anger, or we need to contain it?
You know, people get angry in such a situation, and if we want it or not, it will be the case. They will get angry. But I don't know if I expect the solution of the anger itself.
Remember that the third stage is bargaining. It's like, if you can get as much as many people really, really angry and contained it in one frame, when you go to the bargaining with the government, because that's the third level. If you fail in this stage, the other steps, because you didn't succeed, if you're angry, you went out, you fucked the whole country up.
I think the anger should be used in a constructive and fruitful way to protest, to show that we do not agree, to talk, to think about what exactly is wrong in this situation, to think about the real origins of the problems, to investigate, to research the power structures in this world who benefit from this situation, and so on. If anger is used as a kind of energy to investigate and to speak, then I think it's a very good thing. Anger can be very constructive, but it can also be purely destructive. And in that sense, I don't expect a solution from anger. But if anger is used in a constructive way to protest, to speak out, to raise our voice in public space, then I definitely agree. We need to go through this stage. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate it. It was very, very, very good interview. I will have some thoughts for the next days from this interview. So thank you very much for joining us. Yariv, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. So what I took is that we need to speak out, and we need to be there, and we need to create a different narrative that will compete with the other narrative, and to take advantage of the time where we have right now, where we have a chance to maybe move some people, to wake them up and to move them to our side, because then it starts oppression. We don't want to get there. So
really get the focus on those 40%.
Yeah. Thank you guys for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It was nice to be here, and maybe we meet each other again. You never know.
Thank you so much.
And
thank you.
If you want, keep me informed about the situation in Israel. I'm always curious about that.
We are the laboratory of the world, so
yes,
you want to know what's happening here.
Yeah, indeed.
You can predict what's coming next to your area, you know.
Yes. So keep strong and stick to your principles in this situation, and then we'll make it.
Thank you so much. Good final words. Thank you.
Bye bye. אחלה רעיון.
כן, היה מעניין, ולדעתי הוא עשה לך ולידציה על חלק מהדברים שהעלית.
אני רציתי שהוא יעשה לי ולידציה על חלק מהדברים
חלק מהדברים שאתה אמרת, הוא פשוט אמר, בלי ששאלת אפילו.
נכון.
אבל כן, הוא חיזק כמה תובנות
שאנחנו העברנו בחודשים האחרונים לקהל שלנו.
וצריך לחפש מה המסרים המרכזיים שיעבדו על ה-40% באמצע. כי לקרוא לכולם פשיסטים לא יעבוד.
גם, וזה גם מעלה את האתגר המאוד משמעותי שאני תמיד נמצא בו, ובאמת מנסה לפתור אותו, איך אנחנו, כי אתה יודע, בפרק הראשון כבר דיברנו על זה, שאנחנו צריכים שיהיה לנו נרטיב מתחרה, שהוא צריך להיות חד, ברור, מדויק, כמו הנרטיב של הממסד, שזה בדיוק גם דבר שהוא ניגש אליו ודיבר עליו קצת, ושזאת בעצם הסיבה שאותם 40% בוחרים ב-30%
הם מדברים בכל אחד.
ולא נצמדים ל-30% הלא מחוסנים, בגלל שהם מדברים בכל אחד מאוד מאוד מדויק, ואנחנו היינו מאוד מאוד מפוזרים, עושים הרבה מאוד דברים, מחדדים מסרים, עצם זה שאנחנו נמצאים באיזושהי נקודה שבה אנחנו משפיעים על המשפיענים, אז אנחנו מצליחים איפשהו קצת לחדד את המסרים גם שיהיו יותר מדויקים, אבל לא רק אנחנו, יש עוד הרבה שעושים את זה, שזה מצוין. אז איפשהו זה מסתכם, כי ברגע שגם אנחנו נדבר...
אנחנו צריכים תקשורת מתחרה, שתיידע את המסרים שלנו.
אנחנו עכשיו מקימים גם את הדבר הזה, אז אנחנו עושים את כל מה שצריך כדי, וזה חשוב גם לשמוע שמה שאנחנו עושים ומקדישים כל כך הרבה אנרגיה, זה באמת הכיוון הנכון, ולא רק זה שניתחנו את זה והסברנו את זה ואנחנו הבנו את זה, אבל שיש עוד מישהו שהוא באמת ברמה עולמית בתחום הזה, ורואה שהצעדים האלה הם נכונים, אבל אני גם התלבטתי מאוד בשתי נקודות. אחד, הנושא של הכעס. אני לא חושב שכעס זה מוטיבציה חיובית. כשאנחנו נכנסים עכשיו לשלב הכעס, לפי מודל קובלר-רוס, שדיברנו עליו באחד הפרקים, פרק חשוב, מי שרוצה שיראה אותו, זה חשוב מאוד. הדילמה שלי היא באמת איך להשתמש בו בצורה הפרודקטיבית, ולא בצורה ההרסנית. והאם בכלל להשתמש בו, והאם בכלל הוא חשוב. אז הוא כן חשוב לצערי, כי הוא הדבר שמייצר תנועה לשטח, גורם שנותן הרבה מאוד אנרגיה, והוא כבר קיים. עכשיו צריך לדעת פשוט לתעל אותו נכון, ואני שמח שהוא גם רואה את זה ככה, שהוא לא בא ואמר לי, אסור להשתמש בכעס נקודה, זה משהו שהוא מחוץ לארגז כלים שלנו. גם הוא הכיר בזה שהשלב הזה הוא באמת חשוב. זה אחד. והדבר השני, אתה יודע, אתה מקבל קצת ולידציה ואישור על דברים שאתה אומר, בכל זאת יש לנו אחריות, אנחנו מדברים לקהל מאוד מאוד גדול בארץ, זה תמיד נחמד.
גם נותן לך קונטקסט למה כל זה קורה בארץ בעוצמה יותר גדולה, כי אנגזייטי היה פה, אתה הראית שאנחנו מקום 5 בעולם באנגזייטי, לפני הקורונה בכלל, ואגרסיות, אנחנו היינו מאוד אגרסיביים.
לא 5, מקום ראשון בעולם.
לא זוכר מה אמרת, אבל באגרסיות אנחנו כאילו היינו חברה מאוד אגרסיבית ב10 שנים האחרונות. אז כאילו נראה לי התנאים פה היו הרבה יותר בשלים.
נכון, אנחנו גם כאילו רגילים שמסמנים לנו מטרה, אויב וירטואלי, ואז מלכדים אותנו סביבו. אנחנו לגמרי חברה שמונעת מפחד, הרבה מאוד שנים, זה לא דבר חדש. פחד, חרדה, כל הדברים האלה. אבל אתה יודע...
אבל מה שהוא אמר זה שצריך לנתח מה כאילו גורם לצד השני, כאילו לכעוס. הוא אמר שכאילו...
מה שהוא אמר זה שהוא רוצה שננתב את הכעס ללנתח ללמידה, לזה של לידע אנשים.
אבל אתה רוצה להבין מה 40% האלה, מה באמת מפריע להם. לקחו משהו שהפריע לחברה שלנו, ולקדו אותו מסביב לווירוס.
נכון.
משהו הפריע לחברה שלנו. אם היינו מצליחים להבין מה מפריע לחברה שלנו, שזה לא וירוס, וזה לא הלא מחוסנים.
ואתה חושב שמה שמפריע לנו זה מה שמפריע להם? אני חושב שמה שמפריע להם זה דברים קצת שונים.
כולנו היינו באותה חברה לפני הקורונה. לא היה אנחנו והם. היינו באותה חברה ולכולנו הפריע אותו דבר.
כולנו צייתנו בשלב מסוים.
כולנו הפריע אותו דבר, לא הייתה קורונה. עכשיו
חלק בשלב מאוד מוקדם התעוררו,
יש חלק גדול מהאוכלוסייה, עדיין מפריעים להם אותם דברים, אבל נטפו להם את זה לכיוון הווירוס. אני לא מדבר על האלה המופנטים, אני מדבר על האלה באמצע. ואם היינו מצליחים להבין, כאילו נגיד, ללכת על הקטע שהולכים לחברה דיקטטורית, זה מה שיניע אותם לכיוון שלנו?
אז הוא אמר שמי שמונע מהפחד, להפך. אתה יודע מה אני הבנתי מהשיחה הזאת? שלי כאדם, יהיה יותר קל לשכנע את המאופנתים, מאשר את ה-40%. אתה יודע למה? כי למאופנתים אני צריך לעשות רק דבר אחד, להחליף להם את תמונת הסכנה. אני פשוט צריך לעשות סוויץ', להסביר להם שזה מסוכן, אבל יש משהו שמסוכן הרבה יותר. ואז אני פשוט מחליף את ההיפנוזה שלהם, מלהיות מאופנתים לשלטון, ללהיות מאופנתים לכיוון לצד שלנו. Okay? זה הרבה יותר קל, לדעתי, וזה יגרום לסחף הרבה יותר משמעותי של פאקג' אחד של 30% במקום סחף הדרגתי, וברגע שה-30% האלה יהיו איתנו, ה-40% האחרים נבד יהיו איתנו, כי ה-40% האחרים הם פשוט הרוב הדומם. עכשיו העניין הוא, שגם אם הם יהיו איתנו, הם עדיין לא ילחמו נגד הממסד, הם פשוט
לא, אבל אם יהיה הרוב,
לא יהיו מצייתים לו.
לא, אבל אם אנחנו נהיה 70% שזה הרוב, אז הממסד לא יכול לעשות כלום, אבל באופן עקרוני, כאילו הקטע של התופעות לוואי מהחיסון, זה קטע שיכול לעבוד על 40% באמצע.
אז בואו נדבר על זה רגע. מה הדבר שהם הצליחו לתת לו בתקשורת קאמבק לתופעות לוואי? תופעות לוואי תפסו, הם ראו שאנשים התעוררו לזה שיש סיכון בחיסון, הם הבינו שהמשוואה של החיסון הוא פתרון, מתחילה להתפרק ולעבור למצב של החיסון הוא בעיה, וזה באמצעות ההצפה שלנו של תופעות הלוואי, הם הבינו את הדבר הזה קורה, ואז הם אמרו, אוקיי, אנחנו צריכים לייצר סימטריה. הם גם הבינו שאנחנו הצלחנו להעביר את עצמנו שוב מהמצב שבו אנחנו אלה שמסכנים אותם, אנחנו הסכנה, כי אנחנו לא מחוסנים, אנחנו מפיצי מחלות, אנחנו חזרנו להיות הקורבן. זאת אומרת, אנחנו חווים תופעות לוואי והחיסון מסכן אותנו. הצלחנו לשנות את המשוואה בכמה נקודות מאוד מאוד משמעותיות. אז מה הם אמרו? אנחנו צריכים לייצר איזשהו מצב של איזון. ואז הם המציאו את הפימס. מה זה פימס? פימס זה תופעות לוואי מהמחלה. ואז הם יוצרים בעצם איזשהו מצב שאנחנו מציגים תופעות לוואי מהחיסון, וכדי לאזן את זה, הם מציגים תופעות לוואי מהמחלה. שזה מה שקורה כרגע בתקשורת, זה הבטל שלנו. זה מאוד מעניין לראות את זה.
טוב, בואו נחשוב על זה עוד קצת, אז תודה רבה.
לדעתי את החלק הזה שאנחנו מדברים על הרעיון, תקליט,
זה בישראל.
תעלה אותו לפרק היום, שזה יפתח את הפרק, ואז זה גם ייתן לאנשים את הרצון לראות את הפרק. אם תצליח רק לחתוך אותו, לא צריך יותר מזה. תעלה אותו, זה יהיה הפתיח, רק תציג שאנחנו אומרים לו שלום דזמנט, מה המצב וזה, ואז כאילו שים את הקטע הזה ונגמר הסיפור, ככה נפתח את הפרק. זה יהיה טיזר מעולה לרעיון.
אוקיי, ביי. נתראה אחר כך.
ביי, נתראה.